Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now I'm outside of Ash Fork, Arizona, standing on an old abandoned section of Route 66. Today we're going to be heading a little bit north of here to a place called Johnson Canyon, where we should find an abandoned railroad line and hopefully an old abandoned railroad tunnel that when it was built was the only tunnel on the line west of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and its construction bankrupted the railroad, led to several shootouts, and it was later deemed so important that during World War II, it was guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to protect it from saboteurs. We are about 6.5 miles east of Ash Fork and a couple of miles north of Interstate 40 on the old section of Route 66 that traveled between Williams and Ash Fork. This old alignment of Route 66 was built in 1932 and bypassed in 1952. There's an even older section of Route 66 about a mile south of here. There's an old bridge over here, and I want to see if there's any date on it, because I mentioned this road was built in 1932, but the road slightly shifted over time, and I don't think this is the actual 1932 path, and I'll show you why in just a second. Right off to the side of the road, there's this curb and what looks to be the original roadbed. It looks like the road at some point shifted about 6 or 7 feet to the north. Once we get on top of it, we could clearly see that this is where the road once was. Here's the curb on the other side. And right now we're looking east towards Williams. This older alignment of the road is slowly being overtaken by the forest. In 100 years, the only sign that this road was ever here will be the cans that you will probably still find everywhere. This section of Route 66 was paved at one point, and here's some of the concrete that used to be on the road. But in this area, it's been reverted to a dirt road. West of here, the old pavement still remains, but that area isn't maintained. You may wonder why they'd turn it back into a dirt road, but it's because it's cheaper to maintain a dirt road than a paved one. This area of Route 66 was a major problem for travelers due to Ash Fork Hill, which was a 1,700-foot incline and one of the steepest sections anywhere on Route 66. The steep inclines of this area will come back later too. I'd love to explore more of Route 66 in this area, but that's another video for another time. Right now we need to head a few miles to the north. I saw this as we were passing by and had to make a quick stop. This is the Johnson Crater. This looks like a meteor impact or possibly a volcano, but it's most likely a sinkhole. There are a number of them in the area. I'm not sure the camera does it justice, just how big this thing is. We'll have to get the drone up and take a look from above. We finally made it to the abandoned railroad line, and this is what's left of Welch Station, which was what was known as an OS station. The OS stood for out of station, so the name's kind of redundant like ATM machine, but hey, I don't name these things. In the days before radio, someone would be stationed here, and as the trains passed by, they would send a message to the company dispatcher by telegraph that the train had passed, or in other words, was out of station, hence the name. The trains would go by right in that cut in front of us. 2 tracks from the Santa Fe Railway's transcontinental line met here, but it's been some time since any trains have passed by. We're going to be going down what was the older track today. This station was in use until the 1950s, but there was no electricity here other than for the signal lights. The lighting, heating, and cooking was all done with kerosene. In the summer, the railroad also dropped off ice once a week. So right now we're going to drive down the old railroad bed as far as we can. Then once we can't drive any further, we'll get out and walk the rest of the way. The railroad line through here was built in the early 1880s, and this line caused quite a few problems, not only with its construction, but after as well. This was considered one of the most dangerous railroad lines in America. We've just started and we've already come across a few things here. There's a concrete block with a pole in it. I'm not sure what this was for. Also pieces of wood everywhere. All the track through this area has been removed. The last train came through here about 1960 or so, and the track was removed after that. And there are a couple of wooden posts in the ground over here. I'm not sure what any of this stuff was used for, but there was definitely something right here. And right on the other side of the railroad bed, it looks like this pile of rocks was used as a trash dump. There is just trash all through here. We've just come across this little bridge. There are actually some bigger bridges that were built further down, but they've been replaced or filled in so they don't exist anymore. This is the first bridge we've come across so far. And it looks like this is as far as we're driving. There are rocks across the railroad bed here. It looks like these have been purposely placed. If you have a car, an SUV that can get over these, I think you can keep driving down. But I'm not going to chance it. We're going to walk from here. And there are tire tracks on the ground, so some people do drive over the rocks and keep going, but I'm not wrecking my car out here. We're going to walk. So this is Johnson Canyon. In April 1881, the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, who was constructing their transcontinental railroad line, reached Johnson Canyon from the east. They were stuck with the choice of looping the railroad miles out of the way to the south, which would be extremely costly for a railroad line that was already struggling financially, or come right through this canyon, which would result in a railroad that had an incline of 112 feet per mile, which exceeded grade level standards. Since we're here, you know what option they took. An 1800s railroad line was going to save $1 any chance they could. Aside from the incline, there was also one other problem. We can't see it yet, but there is a sheer rock cliff that there was no way around. They were going to have to build a tunnel. The newer railroad tracks are just north of here, and you probably can't hear it on the mic, but there's actually a train going by on those tracks right now. I heard its horn just a second ago. There's something eerie about being on an abandoned railroad bed, even one with no rails, and hearing a train horn. Because of the incline and the curves through here, trains going downhill would have to brake hard, and that led to a number of train derailments, with trains plummeting into the canyon below. That made this an extremely dangerous route. People still find train parts down there. So after deciding they were going to build this tunnel, The tunnel was going to be relatively short, so it was expected that it would only lead to a short delay in the railroad's construction. Then, as they began the tunnel, they hit basalt, which is a dense, hard rock, and construction slowed to a crawl. There's some wood here. This doesn't look like it's the right material or thick enough to be railroad ties. More than likely, someone just threw this here to try to fill in this little gap in the roadway to make it easier to drive through. We're coming to a cut here. This would have been made by the railroad crew in the 1880s. And from the looks of it, it looks like they blasted through this area. It doesn't look carved. It's not really smooth anywhere. Walking through here, though, you can just really imagine 100 years ago, a train just coming through here. While the tunnel work was going slow, several bridges were needed in the canyon as well, so construction began on those. With so much railroad construction in the area, a large work camp was formed above where the tunnel was located. It is said 1,500 to 3,000 people were living in the camp at its peak, making it larger than most towns in Arizona at the time. The camp was pretty much like a small town. It had things like general stores, saloons, and brothels. The only two things it didn't have were a church and a jail. Here's some siding that was put up to keep the railroad bed from falling into the canyon below. Construction through here was expensive. Through most of Arizona, it cost the railroad about $10,000 per mile to build the line. But through Johnson Canyon, it was said to be $70,000 per mile. They were paying $125 per day just to bring water to the camp. And of course, with so many men working on the line, not a lot to do, and available alcohol, it'll come as no surprise there were problems at the camp. In January 1882, a drifter named Jas Casey shot and killed a railroad employee named William Ryan outside of a saloon. Casey tried to barricade himself in another saloon, but it was surrounded by railroad employees. It was ordered that he surrender, but before he could, someone shot him in the head. There was also a man who the newspapers only name as Scorpion Mike, who was reported to have shot an unnamed peaceable citizen in the neck. Looking down into this canyon, you just can't help but think about how a number of trains ended up down there. And for even the trains that didn't, the fear they must have had coming through here, knowing so many trains ended up down there, and the relief they probably had when they got out of this canyon. Looks like maybe piece of a rail. I don't know. It kind of looks too thin. This might have been part of one of the bridges. I'm not sure. If you know, let me know. You can see here where some of the siding that's supposed to stop the railroad bed from ending up in the canyon has itself ended up in the canyon. Railroad camps were a dangerous place, but you were more likely to get killed by a disease or a workplace accident than a shootout. There was one incident during construction here where a stockpile of explosives was accidentally set off, and 6 people died, or as the newspaper stated, simply vanished. We're finally getting our first look at the tunnel up ahead. I'd say we've walked about 1.5 miles, maybe a little bit more than 1.5 miles, since the path was blocked by the rocks back there. And here we have a concrete barrier keeping the road bed up. This was probably put in the 1930s. Right up ahead of us is where one of the bridges that they built were located, and it's been filled in. I'll put a historic photo up on the screen of what it once looked like. But as you can see, the bridge is no longer here. They filled this in the 1930s. You have to wonder, walking across here where the bridge once was, if the bridge is still down below us somewhere, whether they removed the bridge and built this berm, or if they built this berm around the bridge and the bridge is still underneath us somewhere. I honestly have no idea, but if you know, let me know in the comments. We're finally at the tunnel, and it looks like there used to be a signal or something right here. So this tunnel, this construction of this railroad through Johnson Canyon pretty much ruined the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, and they ended up getting bought out by the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. After about a year of construction, this tunnel was completed in 1882, but it wasn't the end of the problems. As I stand here, I'm just now realizing I left my flashlight in the car, which is a little bit more than 1.5 miles away. Let's take a bit of a closer look here. Here's the brickwork. I was hoping there would be something on the keystone, but unfortunately it's blank. I'm not sure if there ever was something there, but it does look kind of grooved on that one brick. And here's the tunnel. I guess it's time to head through. After completing this tunnel, they had problems with the rocks falling from the top of the tunnel, so they built a lattice using heavy lumber to hold the ceiling in place. If you look here, you can see how the brick ends and it goes to concrete. That's because at one point they made the tunnel deeper. In 1898, there was a fire that burned the lattice, resulting in a massive rock fall that killed 2 people and closed the line for 11 days. To repair the tunnel, they put in this iron ceiling and lowered the floor to prevent any future problems and keep the tunnel open. Luckily, the tunnel is not very long, so I really didn't need my flashlight. I see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now that I've reached the darker part of the tunnel, I hear bats. I don't see them anywhere, but I definitely hear them. But this is their home, so I'm going to try not to disturb them too much. It's hard to believe this tunnel is over 140 years old, and it's been over 60 years since a train has come through here. This railroad line and the Southern Pacific to the south were incredibly important in the settling of the American West. It was a long and difficult journey to get to Arizona and other places in the West, and there weren't a whole lot of non-natives here. But once the railroad came through, nothing could stop the flood of people pouring into the area. The railroad pretty much ended the Old West. I mean, just look at the work that was done to keep this tunnel open. I don't know enough about railroads to know if this means anything, but I'm sure someone out there knows if this means something or not. Here's a look at some of the 1880s brickwork. It looks like we could see some of the marks from the fire still, or at least the marks from a fire. And here's the tunnel entrance on the east side. About 200 feet up above us is where the work camp was, and they'd have to come down the 200 feet every day in order to work on the tunnel. The railroad continues to the east, but it looks to be far less traveled. A new, safer line was built to the north in 1911, but still during World War II, this line was considered vital enough that it needed to be protected, and this canyon and tunnel was an obvious choke point, so they guarded it 24 hours a day with a machine gun. I'm on top of the tunnel now, and here's the canyon, and of course, metal cans. I firmly believe that if our civilization ever disappears, some future civilization is going to know we were here because they're going to find metal cans out in the desert. So during World War II, they built a guard post above the tunnel in order to overwatch the canyon and protect the tunnel. And hopefully the remains of the guard post are still there. I thought I saw it when we were approaching, so I'm going to head up here and take a look. There's a little bit of a path here, so usually that means we're on the right track. I just heard something move up the hill. It sounded kind of big. It may be a coyote or a large rabbit. I never did see what moved up there, so I'm not sure what it was, but here's what's left of the guard shack. See if we can get a closer look without touching it too much. I don't want to further damage the structure here. Unless you really like solitude, I can imagine it was a miserable assignment having to guard this tunnel, especially in the winter. What's left of this guard post does not look like it would have been very warm. I think if I was stationed here, I'd be less concerned with guarding this than I would be of a boulder falling from up here and smashing through my shack. Shootouts, explosions, falling rocks, falling trains. No wonder this was considered one of the most dangerous railroads in America. So that's our look at this abandoned railroad that helped tame the West and the Johnson Canyon Tunnel. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.